Marcus Thompson sat in the back row of the mahogany-paneled conference room, his worn jeans and faded flannel shirt starkly contrasting with the expensive suits surrounding him. The law office of Whitmore and Associates reeked of old money and privilege, much like his late grandfather's estate. He fidgeted with his baseball cap, feeling every judgmental stare from his relatives who hadn't spoken to him in years. Eleanor Whitmore sat at the head of the polished oak table, her silver-rimmed glasses perched on her nose as she shuffled through legal documents. The 70-year-old attorney had been handling the Thompson family's affairs for 3 decades, and her stern expression suggested she'd seen enough family drama to fill several novels. "Thank you all for coming today," Eleanor began, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "We're here to read the last will and testament of Theodore James Thompson, who passed away on March 15th at the age of 87. Marcus's cousins, Victoria and Preston, sat in the front row with their perfectly coiffed hair and designer clothes. Victoria drummed her manicured nails on the table while Preston checked his Rolex for the third time in 5 minutes. Behind them sat Uncle Charles and Aunt Patricia, whispering to each other about Marcus's unexpected presence. "As you know," Eleanor continued, "Theodore was a man of considerable wealth. His net worth at the time of death was approximately $12 million, including real estate, investments, and business holdings." Victoria leaned forward eagerly, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. She'd been Theodore's favorite granddaughter, or so she'd always claimed. Preston straightened his tie, clearly expecting a substantial inheritance that would fund his failing startup company. Marcus remembered his grandfather differently than the others. While they saw Theodore as a wealthy patriarch to be courted and pleased, Marcus had known him as simply Grandpa Ted, the man who taught him to fish and shared stories about building his construction company from nothing. "I'll begin with the specific bequests," Eleanor announced, adjusting her glasses. "To my beloved granddaughter Victoria Thompson Hayes, I leave my collection of antique jewelry and the sum of $50,000. Victoria smiled smugly, though Marcus could see disappointment flicker across her face. 50,000 was nice, but hardly the windfall she'd expected. "To my grandson Preston Thompson, I leave my vintage car collection and the sum of $75,000. Preston's jaw tightened. The cars were valuable, but maintaining them would be expensive, and the cash wouldn't solve his mounting business debts. "To my son Charles Thompson, I leave the cabin in Lake Tahoe and $100,000. Charles nodded approvingly, though his wife Patricia seemed less pleased. They'd been hopping for the main house. Eleanor's eyes found Marcus in the back row. The room fell silent as she cleared her throat. "And to my grandson Marcus Thompson," she paused, "I leave the sum of $10. The room erupted in barely contained snickers. Victoria actually laughed out loud, covering her mouth with her hand. Preston shook his head in apparent disgust, while Charles and Patricia exchanged knowing looks. $10, Victoria whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. I guess we know what Grandpa really thought of the family disappointment. Marcus felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. He'd always suspected his family looked down on him for choosing to work with his hands instead of pursuing a corporate career. But this public humiliation cut deep. Eleanor continued reading, distributing the remainder of Theodore's estate among various charities and distant relatives. The main house, worth nearly $2 million, went to a nonprofit organization that helped veterans find housing. When she finished, the room buzzed with quiet conversations about the will's contents. Marcus stood to leave, wanting nothing more than to escape the suffocating atmosphere of judgment and disappointment. But Eleanor's voice stopped him at the door. "Marcus, please wait, there's something else." She opened her briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. "Your grandfather left specific instructions that this letter was to be given to you privately, after the will reading." Marcus took the envelope with trembling hands, noticing his name written in his grandfather's familiar handwriting. The other family members had already begun filing out, too busy discussing their inheritances to pay attention to what they assumed was a consolation prize. "Should I read it now?" Marcus asked. Eleanor nodded. "I believe that would be appropriate. Your grandfather was quite specific about the timing." Marcus carefully opened the envelope, his heart pounding as he unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The letter was dated just 3 months before his grandfather's death, and every word was written in Theodore's steady script. "My dear Marcus," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means I've gone to join your grandmother, and you've just witnessed what I suspect was a rather disappointing will reading for our family. I imagine they had quite a reaction to your $10 inheritance, and I'm sorry you had to endure their judgment." Marcus looked up at Eleanor, who was watching him with an expression that seemed almost amused. She gestured for him to continue reading. "I need you to understand something important, son. That $10 isn't your real inheritance. It's a test and a message. You see, I've been watching our family for years, and I've seen how greed and expectation have corrupted most of them. They visit me when they need money, call me when they want something, but they never simply call to ask how I'm doing." Marcus's hands shook as he read on. The letter detailed how Theodore had carefully observed each family member's behavior over the years, noting their motivations and priorities. "You're different, Marcus. You're the only one who ever visited me just to spend time together. You helped me fix things around the house, listened to my old stories, and never once asked me for money. You reminded me of myself when I was young and of the values that built our family's wealth in the first place." The letter went on to explain Theodore's true plan. The public will reading was only the beginning. Aliner had a second set of documents that would be revealed in exactly 30 days, giving the family time to show their true colors. "I predict they'll be calling you soon," Theodore had written. "Now that they think you've received almost nothing, they'll want to know if you plan to contest the will. They'll try to recruit you to their side, promising you a cut of their inheritance if you help them challenge the document. This is your chance to see who they really are." Marcus looked at Alina, whose slight smile confirmed that she knew exactly what the letter contained. She'd been Theodore's accomplice in this elaborate scheme. "There's more," she said quietly, glancing toward the door to ensure they were alone. "Your grandfather's actual wishes for you are quite different from what was read today. But as he requested, I cannot reveal them until the 30-day period has passed." Marcus folded the letter carefully, his mind reeling from the revelation. His grandfather had orchestrated this entire scenario, using the will reading as a way to expose his family's true nature. "What am I supposed to do for the next 30 days?" Marcus asked. Aliner's expression grew serious. "Nothing. Just observe. Let them come to you and remember everything they say and do. Your grandfather believed this would be the most important test of your character and theirs." As Marcus left the law office, he felt a mixture of emotions. The embarrassment of the will reading still stung, but now it was tempered by curiosity about his grandfather's real plan. Theodore had always been several steps ahead of everyone else, and apparently, death hadn't changed that. The parking lot was nearly empty by the time Marcus reached his truck. As he climbed into the driver's seat, his phone buzzed with a text message from Victoria. "Can we talk? I think there might be a way to challenge this will." Marcus stared at the message, remembering his grandfather's prediction. It had taken less than 10 minutes for the family to start plotting. He turned off his phone and drove home, wondering what the next 30 days would bring. His small apartment felt like a sanctuary after the oppressive atmosphere of the law office. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, reading Theodore's letter again, searching for clues about what his grandfather had really planned. The letter mentioned that Theodore had been building something special for Marcus, but had wanted to ensure that Marcus would appreciate it for the right reasons. The $10 inheritance wasn't just a test of the family's character. It was a test of Marcus's as well. Over the next few days, Marcus's phone rang constantly. First, Victoria called, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she offered to help him contest the will. Then Preston reached out, suggesting they band together to challenge their grandfather's mental state at the time of writing. Uncle Charles took a different approach, inviting Marcus to dinner and hinting that Theodore had always been eccentric and might have made mistakes in his final years. Even Aunt Patricia, who had barely acknowledged Marcus's existence for years, suddenly became interested in his well-being. Each conversation felt like a job interview for conspiracy, with his relatives carefully probing to see if Marcus would be willing to help them overturn Theodore's wishes. They painted themselves as victims of an unfair system, conveniently forgetting that they'd each received substantial inheritances. Marcus played along, pretending to consider their offers while mentally cataloging every manipulative word and calculated gesture. His grandfather had been right about their true nature. Now that they believed Marcus had nothing to lose, they were willing to include him in their schemes. The most revealing conversation came from Victoria during their third phone call. "Look, Marcus," she said, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone. "I know we haven't always been close, but we're family. Grandpa was obviously not thinking clearly when he wrote that will. I mean, giving the house to some charity. That's not what he would have wanted when he was younger." Marcus let her continue, taking notes on the back of an envelope. Victoria painted a picture of Theodore as a confused old man who'd been manipulated by outsiders, despite the fact that he'd been sharp and decisive until the day he died. "If we work together," she continued, "we could probably get the whole will thrown out. Then everything would be distributed according to state law, and we'd all get equal shares. You'd end up with almost $2 million instead of $10. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. His family was now offering him millions of dollars to help them steal from charity, when just a week ago they'd been laughing at his meager inheritance. Their greed had made them forget their own prejudices. Preston's approach was more direct. He showed up at Marcus's apartment uninvited, wearing an expensive suit and carrying a briefcase full of legal documents he'd had prepared by his own attorney. "I've found 3 different grounds for challenging the will," Preston announced, spreading papers across Marcus's small dining table. "Mental incompetence, undue influence, and improper execution. My lawyer says we have a strong case." Marcus studied the documents, noting how Preston had already begun spending money on legal fees before securing Marcus's cooperation. The desperation was obvious, and Marcus wondered just how deep Preston's financial troubles really went. "What's your cut of this?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about his cousin's motivations. Preston's eyes lit up with greed. "If we can get the will overturned, I figure we'd each get about 25% of the estate. That's $3 million each, Marcus. Enough to change our lives completely." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, playing the role of someone tempted by easy money. "And what about the charities? They'd get nothing." Preston waved dismissively. They weren't part of the family. Grandpa owed them nothing. This money should stay with blood relatives. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with Preston outlining increasingly elaborate schemes to discredit Theodore's final wishes. Marcus listened carefully, recording everything on his phone with Preston's unknowing consent. By the end of the third week, Marcus had accumulated enough evidence to fill a small notebook. His family had revealed themselves to be exactly what Theodore had suspected: greedy, manipulative, and willing to destroy an old man's legacy for personal gain. The most disturbing part was how easily they assumed Marcus would join their cause. They'd spent years treating him like an outsider, but now they welcomed him as a co-conspirator simply because they believed he had nothing to lose. Eleanor called Marcus on the 28th day, her voice carrying a hint of anticipation. "Are you ready to learn about your real inheritance?" Marcus looked at his notebook full of recorded conversations and documented schemes. "I think I already know the most important part." Eleanor laughed softly. "Your grandfather would be proud. He always said you were the smartest one in the family, even though you didn't have the fancy education." They agreed to meet at Eleanor's office the following Monday, exactly 30 days after the original will reading. Marcus spent the weekend thinking about Theodore's letter and the lessons his grandfather had tried to teach him. Sunday evening, Marcus received one final call from Victoria. Her tone had shifted from friendly conspiracy to barely contained frustration. "We need to file the challenge tomorrow," she said urgently. "My lawyer says we're running out of time to contest the will. Are you in or out?" Marcus could hear the desperation in her voice. Whatever she'd planned to do with her inheritance, $50,000 apparently wasn't enough. The family's true colors had become increasingly vivid as the 30-day deadline approached. "I'll let you know tomorrow," Marcus replied, enjoying the irony of his statement. Victoria's frustration boiled over. "This is about more than just money, Marcus. This is about family dignity. We can't let some random charities get what rightfully belongs to us." After hanging up, Marcus sat in his quiet apartment, thinking about the concept of dignity. His grandfather had built a fortune through hard work and integrity, then spent his final years watching his family transform into something he didn't recognize. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Eleanor's office early, carrying his notebook and a small recording device. Eleanor greeted him with a knowing smile, leading him to the same conference room where the will reading had taken place. "Before we begin," Eleanor said, "I need to ask you about the past 30 days. Did your family members approach you about challenging the will?" Marcus opened his notebook and spent the next hour detailing every conversation, every scheme, and every attempt to recruit him into their conspiracy. Elinor listened intently, occasionally taking notes of her own. "Your grandfather predicted this almost exactly," she said when Marcus finished. "He even guessed which family member would approach you first." Elinor opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick manila envelope sealed with wax. "This contains your grandfather's real wishes for you. He wanted you to understand the full scope of what he was giving you, and why." Marcus broke the wax seal and opened the envelope, finding multiple documents inside. The first was another letter from Theodore, this one much longer than the first. "My dear Marcus," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you've passed the most important test of your life. You've had the opportunity to join your family in their greed, and you've chosen not to. That choice reveals more about your character than any inheritance ever could." The letter went on to explain Theodore's true plan. The public will reading had been a carefully orchestrated performance, designed to reveal his family's true nature while protecting the one person he truly trusted. "I'm giving you something much more valuable than money," Theodore had written. "I'm giving you the opportunity to prove that our family's values can survive another generation. You'll face a choice about what to do with this knowledge, and that choice will define not just your future, but the future of our family name." Marcus looked up at Elinor, who was watching him with intense interest. "There's more, isn't there?" Elinor nodded and handed him a second document. This one was a legal deed, transferring ownership of a property Marcus had never heard of. According to the paperwork, he now owned a 50-acre plot of land in the mountains, complete with a small cabin and several outbuildings. "Your grandfather bought this property 15 years ago," Elinor explained. "He's been developing it as a retreat center for veterans dealing with PTSD. He wanted to create a place where people could find peace and healing, away from the pressures of modern life." Marcus studied the deed, noting the property's estimated value of nearly $3 million. But the financial worth seemed secondary to the emotional weight of Theodore's vision. "There's a full business plan," Elinor continued, handing him another thick folder. "Your grandfather spent years researching and designing this project. He believed you were the only family member who would understand its true value." The business plan was incredibly detailed, outlining Theodore's vision for a self-sustaining retreat center that would serve hundreds of veterans annually. He'd already secured partnerships with several therapy organizations and had architectural plans for expanding the facility. "But there's a condition," Elinor said seriously. "You have to choose between this inheritance and joining your family's lawsuit. If you participate in challenging the will, you forfeit everything your grandfather intended for you." Marcus felt the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. His family was offering him $3 million to help them steal from charity. His grandfather was offering him the chance to honor a dying man's vision while building something meaningful with his own hands. "What happens if I refuse both?" Marcus asked. Alina smiled. "Then the property goes to the same veterans organization that received the main house. Your grandfather respected your right to choose your own path, even if it meant walking away from his dream." Marcus spent the next hour reviewing Theodore's business plan, impressed by the depth of research and planning that had gone into the project. His grandfather had interviewed dozens of veterans, consulted with therapists, and even visited similar facilities in other states. The retreat center would offer woodworking classes, fishing instruction, hiking trails, and group therapy sessions. Theodore had designed it as a place where veterans could reconnect with nature while processing their experiences with trained professionals. "He wanted you to know," Alina said quietly, "that he never expected you to run this alone. There's funding for a full staff, and he'd already identified several potential partners who shared his vision." Marcus looked at the architectural drawings, recognizing his grandfather's influence in every detail. Theodore had always believed that working with your hands could heal emotional wounds, a philosophy he'd passed on to Marcus during their time together. "What about my family?" Marcus asked. "What happens when they find out about this?" Alina's expression grew stern. "That depends on what you choose to do about their lawsuit. Your grandfather left you with evidence of their attempts to manipulate you, along with the authority to decide whether that evidence becomes public." She handed Marcus a final document, this one bearing the seal of a private investigator. Theodore had hired professionals to document his family's behavior over the past 5 years, creating a detailed record of their motivations and actions. "Your grandfather was thorough," Alina said with obvious admiration. "He knew that someday you might need to defend his legacy, and he wanted you to have all the tools necessary to do so." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the scope of Theodore's planning. His grandfather had orchestrated this entire scenario, not just to test his family, but to prepare Marcus for the challenges that would come with inheriting such a responsibility. "I need time to think about this," Marcus said finally. Alina nodded understandingly. "Take all the time you need. But remember, your family is planning to file their lawsuit this week. Once that process begins, it becomes much more difficult to resolve things quietly." Marcus left Alina's office with a briefcase full of documents and a head full of conflicting emotions. His grandfather's real inheritance was both a tremendous opportunity and a massive responsibility. The retreat center could help thousands of veterans, but it would also require years of dedicated work to build and maintain. That evening, Marcus drove to the property his grandfather had left him. The mountain road was steep and winding, leading to a clearing where a modest cabin sat surrounded by tall pines. The building was more substantial than Aliner had indicated, with a wraparound porch and large windows overlooking a small lake. Inside, Marcus found evidence of Theodore's recent visits. The cabin was fully furnished, with a stone fireplace, modern kitchen, and comfortable living area. On the dining table sat a photo album filled with pictures of Theodore's visits to other veteran retreat centers, along with notes about what had worked and what could be improved. Marcus spent the night in his grandfather's cabin, reading through the business plan and trying to imagine himself running such an operation. Theodore had been right about Marcus's skills. He had the construction experience to oversee the facility's expansion and the personal qualities to connect with veterans who needed help. The next morning, Marcus walked the property's boundaries, envisioning Theodore's plans for hiking trails, workshop buildings, and small cabins for overnight guests. The land was beautiful and peaceful, exactly the kind of place where someone might find healing after experiencing trauma. His phone rang as he stood by the lake, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Victoria's name appeared on the screen, and Marcus answered with a sense of finality. "We're filing the lawsuit today," she said without preamble. "This is your last chance to join us. My lawyer says we need your signature on the documents by noon, or we'll have to proceed without you." Marcus thought about his grandfather's letter, about the choice between greed and purpose. "I won't be joining your lawsuit, Victoria." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. When Victoria finally spoke, her voice was cold with anger. "You're making a mistake, Marcus. $10 won't change your life, but $3 million could." "You're right," Marcus replied. $10 won't change my life, but some things are more important than money." Victoria hung up without another word, and Marcus knew he'd made an enemy of his entire family. They would never understand his choice, and they would never forgive him for refusing to help them steal from charity. Marcus spent the rest of the day exploring the property and reading Theodore's notes. His grandfather had thought of everything, from the legal structure of the nonprofit organization to the specific therapeutic programs that would be offered. The retreat center was more than just a dream. It was a fully developed plan waiting for someone to bring it to life. That evening, Marcus called Aliner from the cabin's landline. "I've made my decision," he said. "I want to honor my grandfather's vision. I'll take responsibility for the retreat center." Eliner's relief was audible. "I'm so glad, Marcus. Your grandfather would be proud. What do you want to do about your family's lawsuit?" Marcus looked at the photo album on the table, filled with images of veterans who had found healing at similar facilities. "I want to stop them. My grandfather's will should be honored exactly as he wrote it." Aliner explained the legal options available to Marcus. He could present evidence of his family's conspiracy to the court, potentially exposing their attempts to manipulate him into joining their lawsuit. The private investigator's report would provide additional ammunition if needed. "It won't be pleasant," Aliner warned. "Your family will be publicly humiliated, and they'll never forgive you for it." Marcus thought about his grandfather's letter, about the importance of protecting Theodore's legacy. "My grandfather spent his whole life building something meaningful. I won't let them destroy it for their own greed." The next morning, Marcus drove back to Aliner's office with a clear sense of purpose. Together, they prepared a comprehensive response to his family's lawsuit, including evidence of their conspiracy and documentation of their attempts to manipulate Marcus. Aliner filed the countersuit that afternoon, requesting that the court impose sanctions on Marcus's family for their frivolous challenge to Theodore's will. The evidence was overwhelming, and Aliner was confident that the lawsuit would be dismissed quickly. Marcus spent the following weeks preparing for the court hearing while simultaneously beginning work on the retreat center. He hired a small construction crew and began renovating the existing buildings, following Theodore's detailed plans for the facility's expansion. The work was satisfying in a way that Marcus hadn't expected. Each improvement to the property felt like a conversation with his grandfather, a way of honoring Theodore's memory while building something lasting and meaningful. Victoria called him once during this period, her voice shaking with rage. "You've destroyed our family," she accused. "We'll never be able to show our faces in this town again." Marcus felt surprisingly calm. "You destroyed yourselves," he replied. "I just refuse to help you do it." The court hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late May. Marcus arrived early, wearing the same suit he'd worn to job interviews after college. Aliner met him outside the courthouse, carrying a briefcase full of evidence. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "My grandfather prepared me for this my entire life. I just didn't know it until now." Inside the courtroom, Marcus's family sat on one side with their attorney, while Marcus and Aliner took seats on the other. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the case files with obvious disapproval. "This is a waste of the court's time," she announced after hearing the family's arguments. "The will is clearly valid, and the evidence suggests that the challengers have acted in bad faith." The judge imposed sanctions on Marcus's family, ordering them to pay court costs and legal fees. She also issued a restraining order preventing them from harassing Marcus or interfering with Theodore's charitable bequests. As they left the courthouse, Victoria approached Marcus with tears in her eyes. "You could have been rich," she said. "You could have had everything." Marcus looked at his cousin, remembering the girl who used to play with him at family gatherings before money and status became more important than relationships. "I do have everything," he replied. "I have something worth working for." Victoria walked away without another word, and Marcus knew he would probably never see her again. The family that had rejected him for his humble lifestyle now considered him a traitor for refusing to join their schemes. Over the following months, Marcus threw himself into developing the retreat center. He hired a program director, a licensed therapist, and several skilled craftsmen who shared Theodore's vision of healing through meaningful work. The first group of veterans arrived in September, just 6 months after Marcus had learned about his real inheritance. Watching them explore the property and begin their healing journey, Marcus felt a connection to his grandfather that transcended death. One evening, as Marcus sat on the cabin's porch watching the sunset, he received a text message from an unknown number. The message was brief. "Your grandfather would be proud. You chose well." Marcus never found out who sent the message, but he suspected it might have been someone from the law firm who had watched the entire drama unfold. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Theodore's vision was becoming reality, and Marcus had found his true purpose in life. The retreat center thrived under Marcus's leadership, serving hundreds of veterans over the following years. Marcus never got rich in the traditional sense, but he built something much more valuable, a legacy of service and healing that would outlast his own lifetime. Sometimes, late at night, Marcus would read his grandfather's letters and think about the choice he'd made. He'd given up the chance for easy money in exchange for hard work and meaningful purpose. It was a trade he would make again without hesitation. Marcus's family never contacted him again, but he heard through mutual acquaintances that they'd eventually reconciled themselves to their original inheritances. Victoria had used her $50,000 to start a boutique, while Preston had sold the vintage cars to pay his debts. They'd all moved on with their lives, but Marcus suspected they would never understand what they'd lost when they chose greed over family loyalty. They'd gained money but lost their grandfather's respect, and that was a trade Marcus would never have made. Years later, when Marcus was asked to speak at a conference about veteran services, he often told the story of his grandfather's final lesson. He would explain how Theodore had used his will not just to distribute wealth, but to reveal character and test values. "My grandfather gave me two inheritances," Marcus would say. "The first was $10 and a lesson about family. The second was the opportunity to build something meaningful with my own hands. The $10 taught me who I really was, and the retreat center taught me who I could become. The audience would always be moved by the story, but Marcus knew that the real lesson wasn't about inheritance or money. It was about the choice everyone faces between taking the easy path and doing what's right. Marcus had chosen the harder path, and in doing so, he discovered that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the difference you make in other people's lives. His grandfather had known this all along, and had structured his final gift to ensure that Marcus would learn the same lesson. In the end, Marcus realized that Theodore's greatest inheritance wasn't money or property. It was the wisdom to recognize that some things are more valuable than wealth, and the courage to choose purpose over profit when the two come into conflict. The retreat center became Marcus's life's work, a testament to his grandfather's vision and his own commitment to serving others. And every time a veteran found healing in the mountains, Marcus knew that Theodore's final lesson had been worth every dollar he'd given up to learn it.